Got Kelly Frank on today. Her and her boyfriend Dashay have recently moved back to Central Oregon for a while during the pandemic. It's interesting, the stuff that she's studying goes right in line in her grad program with epidemics, and great conversation. It was awesome. We are a go, Kelly.
Right, yes.
Thank you for jumping on.
Yeah, of course.
Real quick, to try to catch everybody up on why you guys are from here. Your
Yes.
family's from here.
Yeah.
You haven't lived here in...
A long time. I was here for a couple months in between college and moving to Texas for graduate school.
But you've been gone from Central Oregon now for...
About 6 years. Consistently for being in Austin, 4 years.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't realize it's been that long.
Yeah.
So your family's from here, and you are in the midst of all the craziness that's going on right now. My own curiosity was, life has changed for you guys pretty drastically. And in Central Oregon, we get a very Central Oregon view of everything that's going on, and I think people here are pretty sharp. I think we get a pretty good perspective. But you being from somewhere else, or being from here, but having lived somewhere else, yeah, in a city, in a different part of the world, in your graduate program and all that's going on, like, your life has been affected probably as much as anybody that I know.
Yeah. I feel like everybody's pretty affected.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to varying degrees, but
our plans changed a lot. It wasn't so much that our existing circumstances changed.
Gotcha.
They did, but
Gotcha.
Yeah, just like everybody else.
So real quick, you guys have relocated back to Central Oregon for how? And when I say you and Dashay, for
the foreseeable future.
Right.
So our initial plan was, we had just gotten a lease all settled for Miami, and we were supposed to move from Austin to Miami at the end of April. So around now, or beginning of April, we had set whatever date we were going to actually go. It was kind of up in the air still, but our apartment was set. It was just the date that we were working with.
Is it hard to find apartments?
It was hard to find one that fit us. We went down to Miami in person, and we were kind of shopping around for a day or two. But we looked at all kinds of places, and it's hard to find something in Miami that's within your budget if you're just in your mid-20s. But we did. We found kind of our dream apartment, and we're really excited and on a countdown. And I was finishing up graduate school, and he was finishing up paying some debt, and that was going to be kind of like a huge milestone for us. So we were really excited. And then we got an email on March 17th. Our initial plan had been to transfer with the company that we were working with. We're in hospitality industry, so we were both food servers at a restaurant. And we got the email that they were going to go ahead and close down until at least May 1st. So all of a sudden we didn't have work or any stable income for the next 6 weeks. Neither of us had ever tried to be on unemployment or understood that process. So just kind of immediate panic and not knowing exactly what was going to be stable for us or sustainable living in Miami with no real income. So we kind of jumped fast, and I canceled our lease. And thankfully, the people that were at the office worked with us a lot. I actually got every penny back that we put down, including application fees and all kinds of stuff. So we were really, really grateful for that staff. And our deal with them was that we would come back as soon as things opened up. But in the meantime, our lease was up, so we didn't really have a place to be. And luckily, my parents just offered to open up their house to us.
Is there something, because like the world has changed more than ever in my lifetime. There are people that are older than I am that they've never seen anything like this. Yeah. So while everything's kind of up in there and awful, and there's a little level of morbid excitement that I think people have of like, how crazy is it going to get? Mm-hmm. That while we're sort of experiencing all that, you get to come back to mom and dad, which is not like a young person's life goal is not to come home. But is there a little bit of comfort in, while everything's kind of taking place, that you've got somewhat of a bubble here to come back to?
Definitely. I think the way I've been explaining it to people that I know here back at home is that we're not really being set back so much as we could be. It's more that we're hitting pause. Yeah. And we're hitting pause in a place that, at least for me, is extremely comfortable. It's borderline boring. I'm finding things to do, but for Dashay, like my boyfriend, he's never been on the West Coast before now, except for visits home to see my family. So
where is he from?
He's growing up. He was back and forth between Virginia and Texas, so he was El Paso mostly.
I gotcha. Mm-hmm. So for him, this is almost a little bit more of an adventure, like for you, where it's coming home and just sort of, like you said, hunkering down. Like being from Texas, we get tornadoes, and sometimes it didn't matter where you were, you just kind of like stayed until you knew that it was gone. And so for you, hunkering down, is he enjoying sort of getting a new experience and getting to push pause?
I think so. I think in a way we both really enjoy having purpose, especially from our jobs. So having extremely hard work ethics, and being really motivated by work and making money and setting goals and going places. It's been hard for us to be people that hit pause.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I know.
When you think about Miami and Powell, Butte, Oregon, that's not different states or different regions. You were talking about two different countries. I mean, that is literally the culture and the atmosphere and the vibe. You could not have gone
to
more
polar
opposites.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it helps though that neither of us were from Miami either. We hadn't really experienced that culture yet. We experienced Austin. Right. And if you've never been to Austin, I feel like people from most places in Oregon can vibe pretty well with that city because it's kind of a nice blend between you get the friendliness of people of Oregon, but you get kind of more of like the hustle and bustle of a city environment of like Seattle or Portland.
Austin has an identity, and whether you agree with it or disagree with it, the thing that's interesting about Austin is that when you go there, they know who they are and they are into it.
And they're proud of it.
Yeah. And so you get to experience a city that has an identity, and like that to me is such a unique culture there because it's in the middle of Texas, which is like a conservative stronghold. And it is
absolutely not.
very, very liberal, but it's like art and food and music. And so culture. It's not, I don't feel like you get the militant version of left leaning. You almost get like the artistic version of it.
You get kind of a nice middle ground because you're surrounded on all sides by people that have all these different opinions on what's at the heart of Austin.
Right.
So you're exposed to people that have a lot of different perspectives, and I think that kind of makes any place kind of nice. What was sad about leaving Austin is that for the last 2 months, I mean, we were still in money-making mode going on our move, so we were in this mindset that we were going to be working all the time, every day, but we were still making time to see everybody and have like a goodbye, send off before we went to Miami, but with plans switching so fast and then seeing limitations, it was absolutely instant, but seeing limitations on groups of people gathering and all that, we had to take out goodbyes. Yeah. So we didn't get to see anybody on our way out of the city to say goodbye to them or goodbye to our favorite places or restaurants or the hikes and all that stuff that made Austin for us and made it home. Yeah. So I think that part is tricky. And I think that a lot of people have had the sense of home taken away from them for whatever city that they live in.
Yeah, for whatever that meant. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I would be extremely thankful being somewhere and kind of waking up out of this in the same place just to be able to hug the people that you miss that are around you that you haven't been able to see in so long. So I'm kind of sad that we're missing that part, but when this all opens up, we'll head back down to Austin and do that anyways, and then head over to Miami. So my
favorite Austin story, we were hanging out down there. We went 8. I think we went to a concert and we were walking through town when I was probably like 05. And there was a homeless guy down there, but he wasn't like your typical, he was kind of like an Austin homeless person. Like he was cool. He was really laid back, real friendly.
Easy to talk to.
Yeah. You kind of got the sense that he was there, but he was all right with it and kind of had other options. But he was talking about the Frost Bank building. Mm-hmm. And the thing about the Frost Bank building is once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Do you know the story behind it?
I do.
Okay.
Well, I think I do.
Okay.
Have we talked about this? I think maybe I sent you something.
You're talking about the glass building.
So here's what he said. And whether it's true or whether it's not, you can take it up with this guy. But he said the architect had applied to the University of Texas and had got denied. He was an African-American, and he felt like that at the time that there was racial aspects that were involved. And this is his description. So it's a cool story, even if it's not true. Yeah. So instead, he got accepted to Rice. Yep. And Rice, their mascot is the owls. Mm-hmm. And so when you look, you can Google the Frost Bank building at night. Yeah. And it's got the clocks, the black clocks, and it's lit up and it's white. And you drive
if you haven't seen the building, you should look it up. It's really cool.
It's an owl in downtown Austin, Texas.
And it's visible from almost every angle of the city.
Well, what's crazy, you see that building right there? I'm like, yeah. He starts telling us the story. And then he tells us, and I look back at the exact same building, and now it's all you can see. Once you've seen it, it's it.
I know. That's the story I tell anybody that I run into that's visiting the city or like being a server from any point. You can like point and say like, there's a story behind this, and it's just a fun fact, for anybody that's there. But I love that story too.
So you guys were going like long-term plans. You're in a graduate program right now?
Yeah, so we had purpose behind the move. It wasn't just a crazy move to Miami, but so the plan was I was finishing up. Actually, this is my last week of the actual program, but I feel like I've been done for a while. Yeah. My program was already online, which is a huge thing because I didn't really experience a lot of a lot of college students are experiencing right now with trying to figure out elementary school,
anybody that's in school.
Yeah, kindergarten. My mom's doing daycare, and I've been asking some of the kids, like, how do you like online school? And they're like, you know, like it's everybody.
Can you imagine trying to host a Zoom class for kindergartners? No. I want to just once, just to see what it's like.
Yeah, just to see how it goes, just to see kids fight with their computers. But no, it's and that's a great skill too that kids are getting.
Sure, it's the world we're going to. I mean, you're going to have to be somewhat knowledgeable about it. So.
Yeah. So I'm finishing up a master's degree in epidemiology and biostatistics right now, which is extremely relevant.
How crazy is that for what we're going through?
Yeah. So going into the program about 2 years ago, a lot of our professors, I remember at the beginning saying, you know, something big is coming. Like within your lifetime, you're going to see something big. Like we're due for something big.
Sure.
And then it's like this kind of started happening, and a lot of professors like, see?
Yeah.
Like, here it is.
Yeah. Did it feel surreal? I mean, to me, because you always get this like pandemic. And like, I'm 37, and the world hasn't really, in some ways, okay, hold on. In my lifetime, a microwave has been invented. This is how old I am. The internet, you know, all like the world has changed, cell phones, all that.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been like a real global thing like this. And you start to feel like that it's not possible. Like the world has probably solidified too much.
Right.
And so in your mind, does it feel just surreal that it's even possible that something this catastrophic could happen?
I think it does and it doesn't after looking at so many different patterns. Epidemiology is the study of epidemics, so that can be confined to something a lot smaller than a pandemic. A pandemic means worldwide, so essentially a worldwide epidemic. So I think that there's, like, we didn't even really talk about the word pandemic so much as defining it.
Okay.
Because it's just epidemics that come into place so much more frequently, because that can be anything,
regionally type stuff.
Yeah, well, and things that happen at like beyond the normal level, essentially. So like an outbreak can turn into an epidemic in a region if flu is more apparent there than in any other time.
Just
that's
an
normal.
Elevated ratio.
Like a spike in a pattern.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's easier for me to see how this could happen just because of how overdue something like this was. I don't think anybody knew that it would spread this quickly or to this degree, you know. At least it's not something like smallpox that 1 in every 4 people die, you know what I mean? The contagion level is crazy on that. But
so because it's what you study, I'm curious, does it feel like in the beginning nobody knew? Like we mentioned this kind of before we went on, but there was a little bit of everybody gets along because we don't know what's happening. Like you saw both parties in the very beginning getting along because it was like
parties.
Yeah, the political parties somewhat agreeing of like everybody agree we're going to shut down until we figure it out. Is it starting to you based on what you're studying right now? Does it feel like this is almost like a practice run for if something actual were to take place? Like we're almost setting a standard so that if 5 years down the road, 10 years, God forbid, something like the smallpox were to take place, we've created a system?
Or even a second wave of this.
Okay.
Because, well, I'll back up. So I think, like, to answer your first question, everybody gets along when they don't know what they're doing and everybody's kind of equally panicked. I think that's a great time for brainstorming to start happening, and I think that's what we were seeing. As people start to get plans or agree or disagree with each other's plans, you kind of start seeing splits. Right. And I think that happens a lot with like different states. All 50 states have their own system for doing things. They've had their own system for doing things. Laws are different in all 50 states. So they're not going to automatically agree on the best way to approach any of this.
For sure.
And now, even with a national recommendation, Surgeon General saying like shelter in place for everybody, that flies for as long as people are able to see or recognize their own patterns in doing certain things. People like to do their thing their own way.
Right.
And I think that is true on an individual level and a wide scale population level. So it's like if you have a state like Texas that is more kind of right leaning and they want less government involvement in places except for Austin, you know, they're going to push harder against being told to stay at home. And I think we're kind of seeing that now. I think the whole Texas opening back up this week, not completely, but up to 25% capacity. Yeah. I think that's a good indication of kind of testing it out because they don't know what's going to happen either after opening things back up. So it's like other states now are watching. I was talking about this with Dashe last night. Like it's almost like we're seeing like the brave older brother march in first and then all the younger siblings waiting back to see like, yeah, this might be a good idea, but we're going to wait and see what happens with you first, you know, because people aren't going to just go in.
Yeah. Can you go outside and see if there's a lion there?
Right. Yeah. So they're going to test the waters first. And I think people are eager to see how it goes. And then depending on the outcome, I think we'll see kind of a ripple effect or it'll just be halted again, and then it'll be phase 2 of shelter in place in those places, and it'll take longer to recover than the first. So I could see it being positive for some things, or kind of enforcing new standards that are working.
When I grew up in Fort Worth, which is not the same kind of political atmosphere as Austin, but what's interesting about Texas is that I think everything that I understand about my leadership model is based on the assumption that people are going to think for themselves. Like, I assume people are going to make their own opinions. I'm not a you better or else person. Yeah. So if I'm a leader of people in Texas, then my stance would be, hey, we know you're going to make your own decisions. Here's our best recommendation. And I think people that haven't been raised in that, and you've been there enough now to see it and understand it, that if Governor Abbott were to come out and go, that's it, do not come out of the house, instantly you've triggered everybody to come out of the house. And I think if you haven't been raised in Texas, like if you've been raised...
Don't touch that plate, it's hot.
Exactly. Yeah, I didn't want to till you told me not to.
Yeah.
And so I think there are places outside of Texas that think that it's possible Texas is being irresponsible. But in reality, what they're saying is like, we've only got a certain amount of control anyway. We're going to do the best we can. And if it works, then they get to be the leader that says, hey, it's okay. It's not perfect, but we can kind of start moving forward. And so
I think there is definitely, there's white, black, and gray in this. There's no right and wrong for anything, because this is just such a novel experience for everybody. Sure. There's no precedent at all. I think the gray area is that a lot of places that are wanting to reopen, or even people with opinions and pushing those opinions to reopen everything, it's like you can have those, but at the same time, I think everybody needs to be aware of the risk that is involved and be serious enough to take precautions that limit everybody from being forced to stay home. Because just because things open up, it shouldn't be done in the sense that everything is safe now, like free for all, everybody can hug each other, like go ahead and take your masks off. It's not like that yet, but it's at the point where we might be safe enough, if we are smart enough to be safe enough, that we can start to reopen things.
I'm a black and white thinker just by nature, and I live in the gray right now because I don't know. I would like to say let's push towards what's possible, but that's not to say that there is no such thing or the whole thing's a hoax. I hate how gray I've been on the thing, because I feel like I do connect to both sides of it well enough to go, I guess we'll just see.
Me too.
Somebody's going to take the risk.
I feel like I'm really flexible in perception, and I can see people's a lot of times from completely opposing sides on a lot of topics. So I can understand, even as a public health student, I can understand being almost forced to shelter at home, because I think if we all did it right for 2 weeks, we would have so many fewer issues than we do now. And seeing the wiggle, like the wobble kind of back and forth of tolls going up and down. Right. And it's regional too. It's in different cities that are following it or not. Right. But then at the same time, I agree with that. And just, I think there's so many controversies in public health and being a public health official or in the field, and that you have to balance looking out for the health of people, the physical health of people, and then finding kind of like a balance in sustaining like a national economy or mental health of the people staying home. So, there's going to be right and wrong to every decision that's made.
I find myself doubting anybody who claims to have a definitive stance. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter which side. I find myself like, how could you possibly know that? I was reading a stat the other day that said heart attack deaths have gone up because there are people that will have symptoms that would normally go to a hospital that now aren't because of the concern over the virus, and then they're dying at home, and what was preventable becomes fatal. And you're like, well, that's what's so frustrating. Like, everybody go home for 2 weeks. We did that. We played along, and then at the same time, there are factors that, anyway. Okay, so based on what you were learning, like in your grad program, the predictions that they made, a year ago, when you guys would have these discussions, did they ever play out like this is what would happen, or was it just strictly from a medical standpoint?
So my program isn't even really medical; it's just public health. So it's more looking at how do you monitor a disease and how it moves through a population.
Oh my gosh, that's super, super specific.
It's a lot of biostatistics and a lot of math.
So part of that would have to be the prediction of how this would happen, or how that would happen, or how it would spread. Based on what they predicted would happen, and now we're living in the middle of it, how accurate was it?
So it's not like specific predictions. I think I know, it would have been great. A lot of, I think there's just inherently a lot of unknowns that come with making predictions in the first place, and you can't even know, what kind of epidemic or pandemic we'd be looking at.
Right.
We don't even know, we couldn't even know if it was viral. It could be bacterial. It could be, it could be so many different things. It can be bioterrorism. You know, there's so many different categories of.
So then, I don't know how tinfoil hat you are by nature, but has this tweaked your suspicious nature at all when you see how it's kind of going? Is there a part of you that goes, wait a minute, it feels this way or it feels that way?
As far as what?
I don't know.
Just kind of how it was.
I don't want to put conspiracy theories in your head. You tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's possibilities for that kind of stuff always. I think that the conflicts that we have with other countries don't help in how you think about that kind of stuff. I've heard that, you know, people say like, oh, this is China's fault. This happened because they were trying to build something. And then I've heard that China is telling people that it's our fault. And so, I mean, you can pin it so many ways if there's existing conflicts, especially if you're teaching it in schools. Like, how many false things have been taught to kids about history just so they have a better perspective of their own country?
Right.
It happens a lot. And it happens in the U.S. It happens everywhere else. Yeah. So it's like we know so little as it is about what this disease is, how it spreads, how long it lasts, if having it means you build antibodies that keep you immune from it now and in the future. We don't even know if you can get sick.
Potentially catch it twice.
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah. Because there's studies that have shown that that's possible too. So there's so many unknowns that are tacked to this as it is, just as it exists in our own lives, that I think kind of creating conspiracy theories, while that might be really relevant in the future once we know a little bit more about this, I feel like it's hard to dedicate a lot of thought to that now because it makes it so much worse.
I think when you combine people being at home, like I've got family members that live in cities that are they're just home. They're just home. And
that's how Austin was. I feel like Oregon is operating under way more normal conditions than Austin was. Yeah, Austin was a ghost town. Yeah. It was quiet everywhere.
But if you combine quarantining at home and boredom and day drinking and all the things that are happening in quarantine, how could conspiracy theories not make their way to the forefront? Like if you're just sitting
I know it's impossible not to get there.
It's like an itch. You know you're going to scratch it of like, oh, wait a minute. This makes sense. And I'll tell you mine. This is mine, and I'm sure I'm wrong. The oil issue that's been going on for the last year. Yeah. And then now there's all the conflict around oil. But here's what got me: the food industry, and being in the hospitality industry. Like, there's a certain amount of connection to it that you have. It's amazing how much of this you're connected to just with what you've done for the last 4 years. But if you were to try to create a food surplus and a food deficit at the exact same time, you'd have to go to the packers. It would have to be the processing, right? Because if you could sever the processing, you could disconnect the supply from the people in need, and that's what's happening. Like, the packers are closing down, and it's definitely virus related, but that's the one that feels like it. And I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that's the only part of this whole thing that has felt like a military strategy of like, wait a minute, the packers that are owned with foreign interests in mind, and like you said, and so it I don't know. Like I said, it'll be interesting to see what does kind of come out in the years.
It's just interesting to see in what ways so many different fields tie into this. The things that you would just never imagine going one way or the other based on something like this. Yep. It's just a domino effect, it seems like.
Do you feel more connected to the whole world now?
I think I did at first.
Yeah.
I think at first, that's not yes and no. I think it was stronger of a feeling at first when everything started happening, like being on the phone, canceling internet services in Miami and stuff like that. It's like everyone was wishing you like help on the phone. And people were waving to each other in their cars, you know, in a big city in Austin. You were waving to people on the street, and that wasn't really normal there. So I think that part, like the human compassion component that comes with this, is a nice touch. And I think it's honestly something that we kind of needed. Yeah.
It's a good reminder we're still capable of it, because you rock along and people get busy. And you kind of forget that everybody's capable of getting along.
Mm-hmm. The longer this has gone on, I think that people are just suffering from boredom and frustrations to the point that is kind of bogging them back down from that shared experience. But you kind of get picked back up knowing that at the end of all of this, when it opens back up and maybe we have a vaccine at some point, it's like everyone in the world right now that is old enough to walk and talk and remember is going to have a shared experience. So it's like no matter where you go, that's kind of why I like traveling so much, because you have these experiences that if someone else has been to a place that you've been, you have so much in common without ever knowing them, and you can sit and talk forever. So it's kind of like that. You can sit and talk forever about what you did during that time, because if you were here or there, it was the same thing.
Economically, what's been interesting to me is that it's easier to trace right now how we're connected economically. They said that that Chick-fil-A canceled potato orders. And that potato farm, a friend of mine was telling me about it. They canceled, and so he's already got 2,500 acres of potatoes planted that he's not going to be able to farm.
Why did they do that?
Supply. The supply was more than the demand. Like the demand has gone down, and so they canceled the order because that was anyway. So then he turns around and he's having to replant a different crop that isn't connected through that, but they canceled the contracts. And you go, well, that sucks for him. Well, the rest of that is he was going to buy trucks from my friend and cancel the order. So then when he canceled the order, now it affects, and so economically, and not that it's about money by any means, but what you realize is globally, economically, how interwoven and linked and chained we are kind of to each other.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you can trace it like that, this guy happened to this guy, happened to this guy,
it's a web.
We are all connected. Yeah, there is a connection to all of that.
It's so interconnected. It's crazy what is. And then it's interesting too, just coming back to kind of the inner workings of the hospitality industry. People are getting so excited in Texas, at least, about patios opening up or restaurants filling 25% capacity. It doesn't really work though for restaurants. Economically, that model doesn't really work, because for a restaurant to really, well, not for all restaurants, but for, I would say, the majority of restaurants, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to open up operations completely if you're trying to sustain just a 25%.
100% expense, 25% return.
Right. So you're getting 25% of your normal customers, but then you still can't staff fully because that staff's not going to make what they're used to. So even if you bring them on part-time, then the ones that were getting benefits aren't going to want to come back part-time, because then that ruins their benefits. And then you're still just losing so much revenue on the operations to only serve 25% of people. So it's a lot of restaurants in Austin still, with the opportunity of being open this Friday or whatever it is, don't want to.
Well, I got another buddy that owns a business, and he's got a guy he would like to hire just to kind of get stuff caught up while they're down. And he can't hire this guy because he's making so much on unemployment, and he can't even let him work for free. This guy would probably come work for free, but then there's a liability if he gets hurt.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about. Like, the world is way more of a web.
Right.
And I think probably, like, intellectually I understood the concept, but to get to see it, you're like, oh man, no one is an island. Everybody is somehow connected to everybody. And then, okay, so let me ask you this, and it's not completely shifting gears, but has it brought about in your mind a more clear understanding of, like, shopping locally or, like, supporting people that are local? Everybody's always said that.
Yeah.
I feel like I understand that now more than I ever did before.
Yeah. I think everywhere I've ever lived has been pretty, like, shop local supportive. I was in Tacoma for my undergraduate degree, and then Austin for this
Tacoma
one.
is shop local?
Tacoma and Seattle are kind of like Seattle does the same kind of concept of, like, keep Seattle weird. They don't say exactly that, you know, but, like, it's another city that is just very proud to be Seattle.
Right.
But yeah, even Tacoma, we had farmers markets and stuff like that. I remember that being a pretty big thing. So, and like recycling and water bottle use and all that was just really at the forefront. It was in liberal arts schools. So, I mean, you always have that at liberal arts schools. But so I've had that experience kind of everywhere. Austin is really into local. And so that
probably of all the big cities I've ever been to.
Yeah.
It is like number one on their list.
Yeah.
And it's not shop local because it's a rule. This is how awesome we want this to be.
And and it's the livelihood of people that put back into that same community. So you want to support the livelihood of the people that are in it with you.
Right.
And I like that mindset of things.
What do you miss about Austin? Right. And granted, I know it was kind of winding down, but, like, just being here, what's the thing that you miss about it?
Oh my gosh. I miss the driving in Austin. I feel like you always see people. The
two-layered interstates.
Yeah. I mean, you see people all the time that are outside, and once you're there long enough, like, you start to recognize people along your drive. And I just miss feeling part of it, because it takes a while once you get to a new place for it to feel home.
Definitely.
To feel like home. And so I think I just miss driving around, just reflecting on the fact that I didn't grow up there, but I'd come to know it so well that it felt like home.
Started to become organic.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go to Miami and all this lifts and everything goes back to normal, what will your job look like there?
So I'm kind of, there's all kinds of stuff happening. So our plan moving to Miami, I forgot I was talking about this. So Dashe wants to go into aviation mechanics, and so he found a program there. So our plan for him that was the reason that we were moving in the first place. I was finishing school. It's time for him to go back, and I was going to watch him do homework for a few years. That kind of changed also. So we were going to go and get residency because then it's cheaper for him to be a student there.
Gotcha.
So that was our plan. We were going to transfer with the company, keep serving. I have actually decided that I'm going to go back and get my PhD degree. So I'm going to do another 5 years. So we're going to be in school at the same time. Yeah. So now I'm in the process of building an application back up and doing a PhD in biology, and then seeing if that can translate to biomedical sciences, just to be more on the molecular side of things instead of public health, because I get a headache with the public health stuff.
You know what's weird about anything that's public services to me is it's always going to be, it's just how the world works. And I'm not sitting in judgment, but anything that's public works in general is always going to be underfunded. It's always going to be understaffed. You're not working with people you're not always working with people who can contribute. You know, like if I was managing someone's hedge fund, that person has a certain amount of financial capability to contribute to the overall function.
Right.
When you're in
stakeholder power in it.
Well, yeah, exactly. And so that's been something like with the 1017 project and with the food that we give away. What's been so interesting is that those people are so selfless because there's not this big giant financial carrot at the end of the rainbow for them. They're doing it because they love it. But I will say it takes a absolute certain type of person to thrive in that.
It does.
And even though it makes you feel good, this is my opinion. The reason that we raise cattle and the reason that we're in the supply portion of that is because I feel like that's what I can do effectively. I do know this. If out of guilt I were to stop what I'm doing and go work in that field, I wouldn't be as gifted in that as the people that are already there.
Yeah.
And so
that's what I feel too. Yeah, absolutely. I think the one line that you said that hits home for me is something you can do effectively, because I think that I can be a good employee in a lot of public health environments. I don't think for what I'm passionate about, I can be as effective as I can in that as opposed to something else. I am so rooted in science and hard science and understanding, molecular processes of why we do certain things or how behavior or function works. That to me is something I feel I can contribute to because I'm so interested in it.
Okay. I know I'm cutting you off, but I want to make sure I get this point.
Okay.
Because I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
If you were to look back in 10 years, was this shift directly attributed to the pandemic that we're experiencing? Is this the thing that triggered you like, no, it's time, I need to make a shift? Or were you already kind of thinking that before?
I was thinking it before. I think going into it, I expected it to be something a little different than what it was. And I think I don't ever finish something, not use it, and think it was a waste of time.
No, for sure.
I absolutely, if I could have gone and done a master's in history, which is not relevant to anything that I want to study at all or anything I've ever really been completely interested in, just from my own experience. But I would go through that program, be glad I'm done with it, but then look back and find something really positive about it that brought me to where I am supposed to be next. So I think that having this experience, one, is really valuable for what's happening now because I have a better way of understanding kind of what's happening or forming my own opinions or better informing others if they have questions for me. I think that's extremely rewarding.
Right.
But it's just not something that I want to take forward as far as a career.
Okay. And I got to be careful. I'm in my mind, I'm trying to figure out a way to ask this question without implicating the person. But every now and then you run across people who will say, I'm just a learner. I just love learning. And then they talk.
Lifelong student.
They talk the entire conversation. They don't ask any questions. And they think of themselves as being a learner because it's what they feel like connected to the concept.
Yeah.
But I had a guy tell me one time when you're teaching kids, back to what you're saying about if you were to be a history major, when you're teaching kids, it's not about what they're learning. It's that they have to learn how to learn.
Yeah.
There's something to learning how to learn that's almost more effective than what you learn.
Right.
Because then you can be a lifelong learner.
Right.
And so when you say you're wanting to go more to the molecular end of it, what would a job in that field, if you could put it on a piece of paper, a vision board, what job is at the top of that mountain?
Building vaccines to me is something that's relevant, but it's more science-based.
Well, it's official. You're the smartest person I know. So building vaccines okay, that opens a whole new thousands of questions, but you are, so much of building vaccines is predictive, isn't it?
It's a lot of doing the groundwork of understanding what's already happening in order to try to predict what might work based on that.
Right. So every year, correct me if I'm wrong, every year they based on the information that's available, they predict which vaccines to really produce in mass, believing that when it comes, they'll have all the vaccines there waiting. Am I close?
Like for influenza, so like the flu vaccine every year.
Am I close on that? And if they pick correctly, it's very effective. But if somebody miscalculates what they expect that'll happen, and it takes on a different strain, then we're behind. Am I close?
So I've actually never looked into exactly how they predict which ones, if it's retrospective or a prediction.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, prospective or a prediction. But my understanding, because I know that flu strain changes slightly every year. I don't know if the research is done beforehand to do it based on how the strain is likely to change, and then they're prepared with a vaccine that addresses that when it comes, or if the strain starts developing before it really hits everybody, if they have a way of kind of housing the disease and seeing how it changes and then beating it to the punch when it hits everybody during flu season and they already have all this. So I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I'm really interested in understanding why that little pill that you take works the way it does. To me is really interesting. Like learning about how even aspirin works in your body. That stuff.
Well, and how that for sure. I remember as a kid, you take like you said, like a Tylenol, and I know that I swallow it and I understand the process of food, but how does that know where, like knee surgery, for instance? Yeah. That's probably the first time it was really specific. I know that specifically I need it to travel to the pain that's in my knee, so they have to deal with inflammation, and inflammation has to be dealt with,
Yeah, it triggers in your brain. A lot of it's neural. It's crazy just how much is associated with the brain sending signals to do certain things in your body.
And that to me is where it gets fascinating, because you go, wait a minute. Me too. So you're only triggering parts of the brain, and then the brain is doing the work. Yeah. So then that means, what is our brains capable of that are just dormant?
Oh my gosh. That's a crazy thing too. The whole field of neuroscience is amazing to me because of how rapidly they're making discoveries about things that we didn't even know before. Like you would never, up until recently, the brain wasn't even thought of as, it's an organ, but it's not really thought of almost as an organ because it's supposed to just house all your thoughts. It's like people, it's so mysterious that there's just many different things to study it. Yes.
Take apart the emotional, like just the physical functioning.
Yeah. And just the psychology that the brain drives is like, how do you start looking at that as it is, like looking at mental disorders as a disease just as much as physical organ damage and what it causes for a disease. Like that's so, that's such a bridge, like getting there. And it's like, we've just started really building a stable bridge. So it's fun to start getting into how all that stuff works and being involved in science at that time.
There's a book by Caroline Leaf, and she talks about, it's called The Perfect You. She talks about that. I'm about to go way over my depth in 3, 2, 1, but that
probably mine too.
the physical brain that you could hold in your hands, your physical brain develops habits or forms synapses that over time develop your patterns or your habits, like muscle memory. Like I can type way faster than I'm supposed to be able to type because the synapses in my brain that hold things together allow me.
Fired the same way so many times that it's
exactly. Yeah. And so what that means is, and I'm not even through the book, but the concept, I've never thought of it this way. She said, you were taught, general wisdom says that your brain's shape tells you so much about who you are. But if we're able to, as simple, even as granular as developing patterns can shape your brain, then that means your choices actually have the ability to start affecting the physical shape of your brain, and you can start reprocessing. Yeah. This is where I started to, like, I just had to put the book down and walk away from it for a while, because she said that leaves the door open for the possibility that mental health and depression and all of these things that we experience could potentially lead us to undervaluing choice. This whole time we've been undervaluing the benefits of choices. Like when you wake up in the morning, you make your bed, or like art, for instance, like on a canvas, what you see is a collection of choice, but we don't think of it as choices. We think of it as a painting, but it was just oil and a canvas until choices made it a reality or manifested a reality.
Right. Directions of a brush. Well, with directions, even, because that's what I was thinking while you were saying that, it's almost like, I think it was a teacher or professor growing up that said, whenever you're driving home from somewhere that you go frequently, always try to take a different direction getting home. Because if you think about I mean, where you're at, there's quickest ways to get there, but you're not always in a hurry.
Right.
So if you're on your way home and you don't have to be there by a certain time, it's like if you don't think about it, you might even almost like black out on the way home because it's just a muscle memory thing. You're like,
for sure.
I had my seatbelt on, I think. Like, I don't even remember how I got here. So if you can decide you're going to drive a different home every way, or even drive a different way home every day.
I meant what you knew.
Yeah. Then it's like you're actively firing different synapses in your brain. And it's just a small exercise to do that, but it kind of creates this active thought of choosing something different for yourself, because then that comes into play for everything you do.
Right.
You're just more geared towards making different decisions.
And if your brain has the ability, back to the original point, but if your brain has the ability to begin healing itself, and it also has the ability to drive you home and allows you the freedom on autopilot to drive you home and allows you the freedom to be thinking about what you're going to cook for dinner, what's going on at work, all of a sudden you realize like there is an ocean of depth in our mind, and that
and for some reason it only surfaces when you're driving or when you're in the shower. Like for some reason those thoughts always happen at that time.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Well, there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and it talks about your brain has two functions, which is the conscious and unconscious. And like if we were driving somewhere in a car full of people and I were to go past someone who's driving slower, every passenger in the vehicle gets silent. Yeah. It's like an instinctive silence. And so they studied that, and what they realized is every passenger is aware that as the driver, my brain has gone from autopilot to conscious because of the elevated amount of risk. And because of the risk, I'm giving it my full attention. So even if they were talking, I wouldn't hear them anyway. And as soon as I merge back into the lane, everybody starts talking. And it happens in such a way that we don't even realize it's taking place. And so
Blink is another good one too.
Malcolm Gladwell. It's the same. It's almost the same book. The two books are almost identical.
I haven't read Thinking Fast and Slow, but
it'll frustrate you because it'll seem like the exact same book.
Okay, that's good to know.
So when you start talking about like the molecular science, that's where you like for it to go, is to develop or to discover.
And it doesn't have to be in vaccines. I think that the vaccination science, the science of building vaccines and all that, I think that ties really nicely in a pretty way into public health. I think that would be a natural progression.
Right.
I have a lot of experience in marine biology and ecosystem conservation and restoration. That is a huge passion for me. I thought it was just going to be a hobby growing up, but the more I think about what I enjoy, the more I also kind of lean into that. So if I can I'm looking at the University of Miami right now and trying to reach out to different faculty that are doing research and taking like zebrafish, using as a model and looking at how their like neurocells tie into being deaf and what causes that and what pathways cause that, and then tying that mechanism in a fish into human science and looking at it in kind of like a biomedical way.
Just the joy of critical thinking.
Yes. I mean, and just the possibilities of what you can take something and make it from something that's not even human. I like that a lot, and that idea. And then just being involved with anything in the water is always good for me. But we'll see. There's so many different directions I can go, and we'll just see what happens.
I love that life has this way of putting a whole bunch of pieces on the puzzle, and you're like, what in the world? Oh, got it. Like,
and then
all
somehow,
of a sudden,
it's like not even your choice.
So I've got a buddy that comes over and helps me with stuff every day, and he's a junior in high school, and they're talking about that they may not resume public school until there's a vaccine. And whether that happens, I mean, who knows? But that means like next fall. And so his entire class, being a junior, he's talked so much about being like the seniors. This is their, and sports and how it's going to affect. But it's a national ripple. Like everybody's affected. They're talking about the potential, and who knows? I mean, he's a junior, so he's just catching stuff, that. But they're talking about backing everybody up almost an entire grade, almost like you've taken it off. But everybody would be equally disadvantaged by that, so it wouldn't even be a disadvantage.
Like not even moving them up to senior year.
Yeah, because like the NCAA has granted one more year of eligibility because of this. So there's some changes that I wouldn't even have thought would be impossible.
Yeah. I haven't heard about that at all.
And so being in your 20s, is there a piece about knowing that everybody's kind of in the same boat? Like this hasn't set you back; it's almost set everybody back, and so.
I think there's a couple different ways of looking at that too, because as a student looking into PhD programs, I know that since the job market's going to be slimmer than it is under normal economic conditions. So that means that a lot of students probably are going to start applying to go to school.
So then the PhD programs get more competitive.
Yes, which is not great for me. But then being a student at this time is a benefit because as a PhD student, I would be receiving stipends and, lab assistantships. So I would be essentially covered, pay for rent, food, and the essentials.
Sure.
But then at the same time, if you're a student coming out of school, you are set at a disadvantage that I would say is bigger than almost anybody else, because you were in school while everything shut down. So it's not likely, I was lucky in this, but it's not likely that you had a full-time position that would support benefits. Sure. So you have no income and a much smaller chance of getting hired into a position of stable income. So it's like your only choice at that point is pretty much to go home, which is okay. I mean, right. Just as an option for what it is, but it's like you said, like no one wants to finish being in school for that long and working that hard just to turn around and feel like it wasn't for anything, or like it was, there's just no immediate gratification from that, which it doesn't always have to be immediate, but just the unknown of, I mean, even for me, like having no deadline as far as when I can move back out of my parents' house, it'd be so much easier for me mentally if I just had
August 12th,
you're like,
okay, at least I got something to look forward to.
Yeah. So it's a lot of patience, and I don't unfortunately have a lot of that. I never have. So it's hard to try to figure out like what the next step is going to be or when it's going to come. But I think that graduating students definitely have a lot of stuff that they're going to have to deal with just because things have changed so much for them. Right. And then it's like, even if when you do find the perfect job posting and I've done this a couple of times, spend hours applying to it, you don't even know if the employer is still hiring that position now, because a lot of them aren't, changed, right. But they haven't taken that posting off. So it's like this little hope dangling in front of you, and it's not even there right now.
I have a theory.
It's interesting.
I have a theory. Another Malcolm Gladwell book, David and Goliath. Have you read it?
No.
About advantages.
David and Goliath, is that what you said? Yep. No, that one's on my list. I've done Outliers, Blink, and there's a third
David
one.
and Goliath might be the best one. And I
really?
love
you like that one?
I love Outliers. But here's what he said, and I think it's interesting, and I wish if anybody's watching, here's what I would suggest, is that he says the way that we look at advantages and disadvantages. Oh, yeah. Also good. But he gives the reference, and I'll give you a complete Cliff Note version. Okay. But there was a basketball coach. His daughter wanted to play basketball, and he'd never played basketball ever. He'd played cricket, and he wasn't even from the U.S. And so he's observing basketball, and you would say, the average person would say that's a disadvantage. You've never played basketball. You don't know how it works. But he said, why aren't we using the entire court on defense? Like when they try to inbound the ball, why aren't we full court pressing every single time? And instead of playing behind the offense, why aren't we playing in front of the defense trying to keep them from inbounding the ball? They go, that's not how basketball's played. He goes, well, why? See, his disadvantage suddenly seemed like lunacy. Like you're so disadvantaged, that's not how basketball's played. 12-year-old girls that couldn't shoot, couldn't dribble, weren't very good, takes them to the national tournament because nobody had ever learned how to defend it. And what was a disadvantage became actually an advantage, because for 12-year-old girls, they're not very good at getting the ball inbounded, and they had so many steals and so many takeaways, and they were beating teams that were so much better. Yeah. So I would say and I'm not even through with the book, I would just suggest if you're looking for another one, but
yeah, I will read that one.
But all the disadvantages are obvious. I mean, as we're looking around the world, like the economy and everything that's happening, but now we've got young people that are reconsidering the value of rural and metro and urban and the collection of the necessary, because what I'd seen developing was people who'd grown up in cities have completely gotten disconnected with some of the functions of life that are so viable or vital to our viability. Mm-hmm. And as much as a disadvantage as the pandemic has been, that there are potential for advantages, that there are going to be kids growing up right now that go, hey, I'll never forget that. And somewhere down the road, what they're learning right now, the opportunities that seem like they're being taken away are going to open doors later down the road.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I'm curious to see, there's always going to be people who take advantage of opportunities, and there's always going to be people who miss opportunities. There's just, for the rest of humanity, that'll be the case. But I'm optimistic that this is going to open as many doors as it's closing.
Yeah, I think it's going to cause a lot of shifts that are probably really necessary for us and for a lot of other nations. But that's interesting too. I've never thought about it like that, but I think of things like the decline in agricultural work and how serious that is for us and our food supply. So if people can kind of reconsider what they want to do as far as what's going to be stable, then more workers going to things like that is going to be huge for everybody.
Right. Well, and I mean, I could beat this drum. I could bore everybody in the room, but we applaud people for going to college and getting a huge amount of debt, but they don't know why they're there. And my point is, like, if you're going to a PhD program, I think we should contribute to someone learning that. Like, we as a nation benefit from people pursuing education that they can directly link to what they want to do for work. But if not,
the education system is a whole other conversation.
But I think for the first time in my lifetime, young people are going, wait a minute.
I don't have to go.
That is important. Agriculture is important. I don't have to be shunned or looked down on because I'm not working for a tech company. Because, hey, if it gets real serious, what do the tech companies have? I mean, you can't, I don't know, I sound like an alarmist, but you can't eat money. And unless there's at least something that sort of disrupts our consciousness that goes, oh, wait a minute, there is value to working with my hands. There is value to getting out away from what I thought was the game that I'm supposed to be playing. And so it's going to drive people further this direction and further that direction in a way that I think could be beneficial.
In a way that might also just be extremely necessary for education reform. Because I mean, I worked all through college. I don't have any debt right now, which is not something I hear really often. So, but all my friends, if I stress out about owing some small amount of money on a credit card, a lot of my friends have tried to console me, telling me how much debt they have. I'm like, that doesn't help me. Now I feel still stressed for me, but way more stressed for you.
Now I'm carrying your panic.
Like that wasn't helpful at all.
Right.
But it's so many people. Everyone has debt, and it's like so much of I feel getting too fast. I'm thinking faster than I'm talking, or talking faster than I'm thinking.
I'm with you. I'm there.
But it's like so many people feel pressure to go because it's this automatic next step that is applauded by everybody, that it's almost like there's no choice. It's almost like the same thing we were talking about, not even stopping to think to make a choice, because that's the automatic next step.
Well, and how on earth we've gotten to this place is proof that it's too good. Honestly, this is just my opinion. It's been too good for too long, to the point that the flat earth movement has become this thing. Here's my point. Whether it is, whether it isn't, doesn't even matter. Like, we are so bored with the necessary items of life: food, health, place to sleep, the necessary things that are required to physically be human, community. We've had those, it's just established. Those are just done. We got those. What are we going to pursue next? And we've pursued all these things to the point that, like, how many followers you have on a social media platform has become social currency. Yeah. And then now you go, wait a minute, in the real world, there's no value to that. There's no functioning value to that.
Yeah.
But yet the guy that lives out, and does sustenance farming, that's been thought of as kind of like the marginal out. Yeah. You're like, well, hey, this is what it means to be human. Like, the human experience is that there are ways that you can contribute to society that don't fit that mold. I think that has just become the prevailing way to do life. And so,
yeah, there's no one right way or order, stepwise procedure to do anything. That's my take ultimately on it. My boyfriend is a great example. He kicks himself all the time because he wasn't in a position where he could go do a 4-year degree right after high school. So he feels constantly behind, but his work ethic and his drive is so much more advanced than most people that I know that even did finish college and now are just doing some job that they're kind of okay with, just because it's not relevant. They did the step like a checklist, and then it got them to being somewhere they're not even really happy, being really efficient, won the game, making a lot of money.
They lost.
Yeah, it's just kind of a mundane.
So this book again, this David and Goliath book, talking about how we perceive disadvantages and advantages. And there was David Bjork had a study that determined there are such things as desirable disadvantages. Mm-hmm. There are disadvantages that you really want to have. And one of them was the intelligence test, that if you make it too easy, people fail it and come across as being unintelligent. That if you want a higher rate of success on the intelligence test, you make it harder to read so that people actually, so that is a desired because if you can drive their focus, it drives more thinking and the hurdle becomes necessary. They said that Lawrence of Arabia, when he overtook the Turks, it was because his soldiers crossed the desert 600 miles on camels in snake-infested desert, and the Turks thought that's the one thing they would never do. And so it was their desperation that from the outside looking in looked like a disadvantage. I wish I'd have gone to school. I wish I'd have done this. That builds into your scope of your whole life, these huge advantages that when you look back, you're like, oh my gosh, thank God that I had that disadvantage because I learned how to learn. And so that would be, I mean, the theme I think of 2020 is like learn how to learn. take it all in.
Yeah.
You're in this experience. You're living something that is just, we may never experience again, hopefully.
And make learning an active choice whether or not you need it, because there's so much you can do sitting on, as boring as it is. Like there's so much you can do from your phone or from a book that helps you in whatever you're going to do when this stops being so boring.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have to choose to do it too. So,
hey, thanks for coming. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm excited to
needed a conversation too.
Dr. Frank someday. You can call me and be like, hey,
all right,
this is something you will not understand, but here's some new information.
We like all the same books. I think that it'll be fine.
And absolutely awesome. Hey, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks.